Hey everyone, it's Mr. Ross, and today we're going to be talking about the 8 characteristics of civilization. And here in just a few minutes, you're going to be retaking your 8 characteristics of civilization exam. So what we're going to be doing is we're going to be looking back at the slideshow that Mr. Ross, of course myself, Mr. Huber, and Mr. Jerkmeyer showed you in class, depending upon the class that you're taking. And we're going to look at the different details that make a civilization. But before we can do that, we're going to simply define what a civilization is. We're going to briefly talk about the importance of farming and how farming is important to all 8 characteristics of civilization. And then, of course, we'll break down all 8 and leave you, hopefully, fully prepared for this quiz. So, let's begin with the definition of civilization. Civilization is a complex society that first grew from the development of cities after the Neolithic Revolution, or in other words, the Agricultural Revolution. It brought far-reaching changes to human life, resulting from the beginning of farming. So, in other words, civilizations are large or very detailed societies coming from the Neolithic Revolution, bringing changes to human life, resulting from the beginning of farming. And most scholars agree, or rather most historians agree, that there are 8 different features that make a civilization a civilization. So, the end of that definition talks about farming. Why is farming so important? Well, farming is basically where civilizations came from. Without farming, we wouldn't have the different types of characteristics that exist, or rather define a civilization. So, because farming existed, there was a surplus or a amount of extra food that was offered. And with that came the domestication or the training or taming of animals. That led to villages coming together due to the extra food, which led to specializations of jobs, art, science, literature, and math, different types of innovations or inventions, a centralized government, armies, cities, and of course eventually public works like roads and bridges that the government of course pays for, and people work for the government in order to have those public works created. So, in other words, farming, very important. Let's begin going down the list of different characteristics of civilization, beginning with advanced cities. Now, as farmers began to settle in the fertile river valley, or the Fertile Crescent, they began to grow a surplus, once again, or extra food. And because of that extra food, the food increased the population of the settlement that led to the formation of cities. So in other words, if I'm a farmer and I grow a lot of food, a lot of people will want that food and come and live next to me. A city, as we know, is a large group of people who live in a specific space. And a city is usually a center for trade, which means that people are coming into the city, they're seeing this extra food, they're buying it, they're trading it, and we began to see a lot of trade and commerce begin to develop in these areas, which led to cities, which eventually led to civilizations, or, as we study empires, city-states. Next, we have a organized central government. And as you can see, I commented talking to the rest of your teachers saying, fantastic collaboration, guys, because this PowerPoint, I hope, is very beneficial and teaches you quite a bit. I feel like we did a pretty good job on this one. So, anyways, organized central government. The definition of an organized central government, or what we're trying to basically explain to you, is that an organized central government has a government with rules or way of voting or control. It's not just a chaotic, violent system. The growing population of cities, or rather the number of people that were beginning to be added to the city, made government or a system of ruling necessary, which means that leaders began to understand that they needed to maintain order and establish laws in order to maintain that order. Governments began to oversee the business of running and maintaining the cities, and all civilizations now have a system of government to direct people's behavior and make life orderly. Just like at Jones Middle School, where we have expectations and procedures in the classroom, it's the same with the centralized government, with the rules that they establish to ultimately keep the people safe, or in other words, a government's number one job being to protect its people. Next, we have complex religions, which is a set of spiritual beliefs, values, and practices where religious leaders would conduct elaborate ceremonies, or in other words, like really fancy, large, complex ceremonies to appease the gods and ensure a bountiful harvest. So floods and droughts were blamed on the gods' anger. So rituals were conducted in the temples. And this is bothering me. Look at this. There we go. Okay. So in other words, religious leaders, they would see a natural disaster or something bad happen as their gods were mad at them. So they would come back and conduct large rituals or ceremonies to appease their gods. So complex religions, of course, affects civilizations as a whole. We're going to move on to job specialization, where specific jobs are established with certain requirements or specialties. As cities began to grow, there became a need for specialized workers. It wasn't just everybody does the same thing constantly. The civilizations began to have a need or needed people who could do different things. So in other words, no longer could individuals do all the work. Food surplus provided the need for specialized skills for workers. So organization and, of course, different types of tools that would have to be used. People would have to be trained to use them. Specialized help workers refine their skills and specialize on one specific task. So in other words, they focus on one specific thing in order to help them to meet the task that is assigned to them by the leaders of their civilization. We studied cuneiform in class, and one of the activities, or rather one of the stations that was offered in the cuneiform stations was recreating a social class hierarchy, or the triangle that you saw. See, social classes, the definition of social classes would be a broad group in society having common economic, cultural, or political status, distinguished from other groups by such things as wealth, property, and rights. So in other words, what that means is people become separated due to the amount of money that they have, the types of property that they own, and the different types of rights that are given to them by the government or their gods in their civilization, or so they're believing. As jobs became specialized, so did the status or the position that a person was in, or the need for certain individuals. That need began to increase. So knowledgeable people and educated religious leaders were respected. Unskilled workers kind of moved to the bottom of that social class triangle that we're describing. So if you're looking at this is what we're talking about, a movement down into the lower parts of that hierarchy. Your higher people would be your religious leaders, and ultimately your king or your emperor. Herders were needed and respected for food, while masons were needed for building. Everybody had their own job. Everybody was working in a certain way. So it was very important that everybody did their job. Otherwise, it could lead to the downfall or the slowing of processes. The downfall of the civilization, that is, or the slowing of processes in that civilization. Number 6, we have writing. Now, we do this every single day in class, whether it's on a computer or it's writing on a piece of paper, whether you are writing out a math problem using ALEKS or trying to write out a word and see if you can understand it in Reading Plus. Writing is to trace or to form characters, letters, words on the surface of some material with a pen, pencil, or some type of other instrument. With the Sumerian Empire, they would use a type of reed using clay, and they would press these different shapes into a piece of clay. Records were needed to keep account on trade goods and food storage, and writing was needed because the information became too great. We understood that one person could not keep track of everything, so we had to have some type of system to keep track of every single material that we had. For example, if someone had a surplus of food, as we talked about in advanced cities, if someone had a surplus of food, that meant that they would have to keep track of how much food was being lost and, of course, how much new food was being gained or added to the total. So writing became an essential part of a civilization and is one of the characteristics that we consider to be a foundation for the establishment of civilizations that we know today. Some famous empires being the Sumerian Empire, the Greek Empire, the Roman Empire, the Indus River Valley Civilization, Japanese Empire, and so on, which we'll get around to studying all of those. Don't worry. Number 7, art and architecture. The arts and artwork of a thing, place, time, person, and so on and so forth. Humans have created art and architecture to display or present some type of message, whether it be beauty or it's trying to explain a story to someone else or trying to represent someone in power or some type of animal or some type of object that is represented in that society. All civilizations have a highly developed culture, including the arts, such as painting, architecture, literature, and music. So, for example, as we start to listen to music nowadays, people will often sing about love, and love has become a big part of the American culture. So people will often talk about love and relationships. They will talk about heartbreak. They will talk about falling for someone else. With that being said, this is a form of expression. Architecture, of course, being buildings, different types of structure, literature such as books and stories and so on that are passed down from generation to generation. Let's finish it out with public works, which include structures such as roads, dams, or post offices paid by the government for public use. So, for example, the roads that we're traveling on are completely paid by the government. The government will hire workers in order to create those roads. And of course, if something happens on the roads that damages the roads, they will also hire individuals to come back and fix those roads. The government would order these types of public works, although it's costly to aid and benefit the community. So the government will ask for, unfortunately, taxes from taxpayers in order to pay for these roads, in order to keep us on track so that we don't eventually damage our cars, have a pop tire, and have to call AAA because we hit some type of nail or some type of pothole. So, just to briefly recap, let's go all the way back. We have advanced cities, organized central government, complex religions, job specialization, social classes, writing, art and architecture, and public works. This is just a brief recap, and you are more than welcome to go back through these slides and, of course, rewind the video and see what you've missed and maybe go back and study on some of those concepts. Of course, I'm here for you. Mr. Huber is here for you in order to explain these concepts as well, Mr. Driftmeyer. And if you ever have any questions or concerns, I, of course, am available. Mr. Huber is available as well. And we want to make sure that you are prepared and ready for your future at Jones Middle School and beyond. You enjoy the rest of your day. Please study hard, take the quiz, get it passed, get the job done, and thanks so much from Mr. Ross.